everybody, and welcome to the LGBTQIA podcast with me. My name's Paige. I am the LGBTQ plus host for Aston Student Union, and I use she, her pronouns. We are here today with Dan.
Hi everybody, I'm Dan. I use he or they pronouns, and I identify as genderqueer and transmasculine.
Fabulous. And today we're doing the T is for Transgender podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Thank you.
We've actually been having a solid chin wag before we even started. So we've got loads of talk to come. We'll start with something really just nice and simple. What is something that made you happy today?
I've just bought a new set of cross-stitch kits that I'm very excited to start.
Nice.
They're printed.
Very nice.
I'm very excited for it.
What is like the pattern?
I've bought a whale one, and I bought an underwater scene and a tiger because I wanted to make one specifically for my sister. So.
Oh, I love that. I love the idea of a little whale one. That's so nice.
I'm looking forward to it. It looks pretty good.
I don't have the patience for that kind of thing at all. I'm not very creative.
Honestly, the last one I did took me nearly 3 months, and you just keep plugging away at it, and it looks really cool because you just keep going, and then suddenly you've got this pattern that appears.
And you kind of wake up one day, you're like, I made that.
Yeah.
Look at me.
It's pretty cool.
So we've already dived into this before we even pressed record, and Dan was telling me that there's a lot of information here. So Dan will share what he chooses to share, but what does being transgender mean to you? And also, if you want to talk about being genderqueer and everything outside of that as well, please feel free.
I will do. Being trans, honestly, to me, being trans, especially now, mostly post-transition, means that I get to live as myself every day without sort of worrying about it and stressing about it, which is very exciting because it's a thing that's taken a lot of exploring and getting used to. And I get to enjoy the facets of gender that a lot of cis people don't get to even consider or explore, particularly with being genderqueer and identifying with non-binary identity. I get to look beyond what society deems as the correct gender and sort of get to properly explore how I express things and how I think of myself and how I think of other people.
It gives you like tools for understanding other people better, I feel. Once you've been able to step outside of that, like that binary and that norm, you're kind of able to like understand just why people act the way and feel and think and express themselves the way they do.
Yeah, it gives you as well as an understanding. So I will always now have an understanding of misogyny and sexism just because I've experienced it before I've transitioned. And so moving into that position of now holding the authoritative voice of being seen as male, but I also get to appreciate what people might do to make themselves feel comfortable and why certain people might just wear specific clothing if they're feeling down, because it just gives them that boost that other people just won't understand.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating, and I know you have briefly spoken to me about this before, that you are able to say, well, I've experienced being oppressed for my gender in a multitude of different ways, I guess.
Yeah,
and that means that you're able to I mean, it's a heavy price to pay, but it definitely must have opened your eyes to things.
Yeah, it gives you, I feel like it gives me more of an understanding of what plenty of my friends are going through with just dealing with everyday sexism, but also then dealing with generalized gender oppression in people recognizing me as trans or recognizing me as being queer in some way. And so just taking something out on that.
And it's just something that a cis person couldn't even begin. I don't think a cis person could even begin to understand how that feels, because I mean, I can't. I'm speaking on behalf of the cis people. I can't begin to understand how that feels.
Yeah, I guess I'm lucky in that I've not experienced a lot of transphobia. A lot of the oppression or the hate that I've received has been, I think, largely perceived as me looking queer as opposed to be specifically looking trans. And I know that's definitely a
Okay.
privilege that a lot of people won't have experienced. Um,
Mm.
but I think so. It's I think a lot of the rest of the queer community will have experienced it in some way when you get, say, butch lesbians or very femme presenting
Mm-hmm.
gay men. It happens quite regularly that they'll experience some of that gender oppression merely because they're trying to live as themselves outside of the required stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. This might sound like a really dumb thing to say, please tell me if it is. But I genuinely, part of me genuinely feels that people who are able to step out of the gender binary they're the like next level of human. Like they've transcended outside of the binary. They're not held down by it. And they're just living glorious free lives, free is very nuanced in that context. But does that make sense? I just truly feel like
Yeah.
they've broken the barrier and they're like sorry, I don't know if I can flag on the video, but I just did.
No, I think,
I don't know. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. I think that you get to experience a level of, yeah, personal freedom that you don't get to when you're stuck in a box. But I
Mm.
think the role of the gender binary within society means that although you can sort of personally escape it, you're always stuck with it a bit. Because
Mm-hmm.
even though plenty of people will identify with non-binary identity, they might still be assumed to be male or female, depending, and so
Mm-hmm.
sort of lumped into the binary box anyway, sort of without your permission.
Yeah. Without your like given consent as well. And I suppose workplaces and institutions are not set up to provide safe places for these people. And so I suppose you're right. The effects of the binary still, I guess, like put them in the box, and it's something that
Yeah,
needs changing
I mean,
drastically.
yeah, let's just throw out the binary. I think the binary boxes, although they more specifically affect trans people and people that are non-binary, it really affects a lot of cis people as well because, yeah, they have to present in a certain way, or they're forced to wear a specific uniform at work, or they're automatically assumed
Yeah,
to be various things just because of how they
and
present
and
what people assume.
absolutely. And I'm going to only draw this to cis people for a hot second because it's not about them. But I suppose that's something they may not realize is that this binary that they don't understand is affecting them as well. It
Yeah,
affects them even if they are happy with their gender that they're assigned at birth. The binary they're put in, that box they're put in, still affects them in ways they can't even begin to understand.
yeah, and I think that's one of the wonders of modern feminism. Um, if you exclude trans exclusionary feminists, is that it's actively fighting against those stereotypes, and so in its own way, it's breaking down the binary boxes.
That's really interesting. I've never, obviously, my feminism is inclusive and I'm really proud of that, but I'd never thought of it that way. It does, but just by questioning the norms for one gender, you question them for all of the genders, don't you? I
Yeah,
suppose.
and you see a lot in the sort of the feminist activism that's aimed towards men and things like engaging with emotions and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Allows it allows the stereotype to break down, and so it sort of boxes people less. It opens that initial
Yeah,
door that allows the freedom to come through.
absolutely. Wow, what a intense start. Buckle down, everybody. We're on at question 2.
The best way, go straight
That's
in with feminism.
that is, yeah, absolutely. Feminism is on the table at all times. People never forget it.
Absolutely.
So, what is an experience you've had as a trans person that you wish more people knew about?
As sort of dull as it sounds, probably waiting times. It's one of the issues that a lot of cis people don't recognize that trans people have to experience. Whether it's waiting for policies to be adapted wherever you're working or wherever you're studying, or whether you're waiting for various medical appointments, or you're waiting to be able to go to a place or to do a thing. There's always so much waiting that is involved. And I think a lot of cis people that don't know trans people, don't really have an active engagement with it, assume that someone comes out as trans and then the next day they're offered medical support, or the next day they're
Which
able
is
to.
just not,
Yeah, it just isn't the case. I
that
mean,
just ain't it, is it? Yeah.
no, I don't know about plenty of other countries, but in the UK, wait times just to be seen by a gender specialist are up to 4 years long, and that's for the first appointment.
Didn't you tell me once that there's like 4 doctors? Isn't there like 4 in the UK that specialise in?
There's 12 clinics in the UK, and I mean, in the last 15, 20 years, the number of referrals has gone up by something ridiculous, like 100 times. It's a huge amount, and the demand just isn't being met by now. You're looking at
No.
up to a 4-year wait for your first appointment, and then at least a year in between every appointment.
And that is obscene. It's obscene. And
Yeah.
it's obscene because in those 4 years, a person is going through so much emotional turmoil. Well, quite often, obviously not everybody,
Yeah.
over what is going on in their lives. And if they just had medical attention sooner, it could prevent a lot of that.
It's one of those things where, unfortunately, because everyone is told to wait, so we have seen a rise in private clinics, but then there's sort of the people that rush to go for private, and so the fact that plenty of people simply can't afford private healthcare. I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about living in Britain, is that we have the NHS, and so all of my medical care is covered. So I don't have to pay for hormones or surgery. It's all covered by the NHS. But if you go private, you're looking at thousands of pounds for various treatments over your lifetime. And it's just not something
And that's
that people
a
can
privilege
give.
if you're able. Yeah, it's not realistic for the majority of people. And when you think about all the different systems working against transgender people, they may find it harder to get work. So how are they meant to? I'm not getting angry at you, Dan. I'm getting angry at the camera. How are they meant to, fund this really expensive, life-changing treatment? And
Yeah.
cis people we can be held accountable because it's the structures that we work in every day that affect this kind of healthcare. If the people you vote for, the people you interact with, they affect how many clinics are available and open, the funding they get. All of these things I feel like cis people can be held accountable and they should know about it. I'm really glad you brought it up, actually.
Yeah, it's one of those things that a lot of people just simply don't understand or don't know about, because it's not part of the general discourse of trans people, particularly in the media, where trans women especially are vilified. You just don't see the whole bit about, well, I had to wait for 4 years and see 6 medical professionals to be signed off for this one thing. There's an assumption of, I went in, demanded it, and was given it immediately.
And I think that reflects as well, obviously, trans people and non-binary people who get these surgeries as well, they're not being given the platform to explain this, are they? Because if that's not in the general discourse in the wider population, then obviously their voices aren't being heard, because it's
Yeah.
happening. You're telling me here that it's happening.
Yeah, I guess a lot of it is because it's the non-glamorous side of everything.
Yeah, I was
The
thinking
bit,
that.
the
Yeah.
bit that the bit of the media that is willing to show trans people and transition in a positive light, it's always about, here's your before and after photos, and here is your
Hmm.
surgery reveal, and here is the outcome of this
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
It's never a focus of, oh, you waited this long for this thing, and that was a real issue and a real difficulty with your mental health. And I mean,
Hmm.
trans people are studies have shown that trans people are just so much higher at risk of poor mental health anyway. You then include wait times and or unaccepting parents or unaccepting family, or not being in a
Hmm.
space at work where you could come out, and those things just all pile up really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know some people like to use the argument, well, it's expensive. I don't want my NHS paying for this. And that argument itself, I reject. But if you really want to get down to money, think about all the money being spent on the mental health services to help these people in their later life. Because, like you said, their mental health has been severely affected because they've not had the treatment when they've needed it. That's probably cost goodness knows how much more. Part of my degree talks about how expensive healthcare is, and it's just billions each year because
Yeah,
these people aren't given the support they need at the beginning.
it's a huge amount anyway. And I mean, having looked at I have considered in the past going private for healthcare for the reason that it's such a long
Mm.
wait. Um, but when you actually look at the cost of surgery for one person, it's negligible compared to various other healthcare, and it's done by professionals that specialize in trans healthcare but also do other things. So my top
Mm-hmm.
surgeon he specializes in top surgery for trans men, but he's also a specialist in breast cancer. So it's not his only job. He's looking at various areas within his surgery and his surgical life.
Mm. They're not just sat around twiddling their thumbs between top surgeries, like,
No,
oh, what will I do next? Waste the NHS's money? Like,
even if they were twiddling their thumbs, they have such long wait lists, and they have so many people that
they wouldn't
are
be twiddling their thumbs.
they wouldn't be. I know that the day I had
Mm.
surgery, there were another three people having surgery either before or after I was. Like it's not like
It's a
they
full
do
day.
one person a week, and my surgeon operates 3 days a week, and he's going to have that
Mm.
same number of people all the time because people are just desperate to have this surgery.
And desperate's the right word there, I think, isn't it? It's not something you wake up one day and go, oh, I think I fancy this. It's like
Yeah,
it's guttural.
yeah, and it's one of the almost heartbreaking things about countries that only have insurance-based medical systems is that most trans healthcare is viewed as optional. It's viewed as elective surgery as opposed to like life-threatening or life-changing surgery. It's seen as, oh, you want this rather than you need this, and so a lot of people are prevented from accessing it because their insurance simply won't cover it.
Mm. And they're forced to work to pay for it themselves, while their
Yeah,
colleagues and peers just, pay for other nice things or holidays or, down
yeah.
payments on houses or whatever else it is. Yeah. I have a question actually, and it's a bit off track, and you don't have to answer it. But your top surgeon, were they did you find that they were kind and they were willing to hear you and listen to
Oh,
you, or
I
was
mean,
it very much like, this is a job, I do it?
no, the surgeon I went with is one of the most requested in the country for top surgery anyway. Um, but he's got a brilliant bedside manner, and he goes through all of the possible outcomes. And he even said to me in my consultation, we'll keep redoing it until it's right, without any sort of any additional pressure. It was, we will get this right for you,
Mm.
as opposed to, we will do this job and then the job is done. There was a specific
That
attempt to say, we will get this right for you.
That brings me joy, because you do wonder whether people are just doing it because it's, there's a niche in the market and they've got the right skills or whatever. So I'm glad the bedside manner meets the skill set.
Yeah, it really does, and it's wonderful when you actually get a good surgeon or a good doctor that not only understands what you're going through, but is then able to actively help you, because so many
Healthcare.
medical professionals, as brilliant as they are, often simply don't understand trans healthcare, and so they get things wrong, or they say the wrong thing, or they assume something that isn't correct, and so it can
Absolutely. I
really
was literally
cause
about to say, because I know that I'm a little bit obsessed with OBGYN YouTube. It's a weird flex on my behalf, but
that's an odd flex.
yeah, I know. It is an odd flex, but I follow this one YouTuber, and she's an OBGYN, and her language is so inclusive and it's so refreshing. And she regularly says, like, and because obviously she has followers who are like, well, why are you using, like, people who menstruate, etc., etc. And it's like, well, because it's not just women, like, and you need to be aware of that as a healthcare provider, because it's very sensitive, and these, especially OBGYNs, and they will deal with people on a day-to-day basis who don't identify as women but have these parts that are associated with women, and it's a very, very sensitive subject, and healthcare providers need those tools.
And it's an area that, even within the trans community, people obviously, there's various dysphoria that's caused by having to deal with various body parts, particularly if they're specifically gendered. And so having a positive and a progressive healthcare worker being able to use inclusive language and to be able to set the scene for it being accepting and comfortable for you is the most important thing.
Absolutely. So any future doctors or nurses or healthcare providers out there watching this, like, internalize that. Inclusive language is just golden. It is so useful. It is such a powerful tool.
Yeah, and language in its own right is the easiest thing that you can adapt. Like, with language, it's even if it takes a while, it's one of those things where you can actively change it in your own life without causing any difficulties for anyone else.
And it's all right if it takes you a few attempts to rewire your brain to get that language correct, as long as you keep trying to do it.
Yeah.
So we talked about this a little bit before, but have you ever been to Pride?
Oh, I have. I've been to quite a few, so I will go through them in an order. So I have been to London Pride, both participating and watching. I've been to Birmingham, both participating and watching. I've been to Brighton's General Pride, just watching, and then I've been to Brighton Trans Pride, which I've participated in for the last 4 years, I believe. So I have quite a wide range of experience with Pride.
You are, yes, the most experienced Pride goer we have had yet on the podcast, I have to say. What was your favorite experience at any of them?
Honestly, Trans Pride is, as much as I love Pride in general, Trans Pride is just so much better. It's like next tier. You just can't get better. It's such a community feel, and it doesn't have the consumerism which is just prevalent in all of the general big city prides. So it's community led, and it's everyone participates in the march, and it's run by donations, and it's sort of, if there are any sponsors, it's specifically trans specific sponsors or community groups that are sponsoring, rather than the big corporations that just want to put their rainbow on something.
Yes, and it is literally just that. They are just putting their rainbow on something. That summarises it so nicely. I didn't realise that. Yeah, I didn't realise that Trans Pride was better in that sense, actually.
Yeah, so it was set up by a group of trans people in 2013. And so it's
Right.
obviously quite a new pride, but it runs alongside a whole load of things. So for the last few years, they've run effectively a sports campaign. So they've been getting trans people access to different sports that they can try, or they've had different sports professionals coming in to speak to people so that people aren't excluded from any sort of sport. But they also have an academic side of it. So they run a trans and non-binary conference most years for the previous days before the Trans Pride weekend, which I've been lucky
Oh,
enough to go
nice.
to. And so you get to
What have they been
not
like?
oh, it's brilliant. You get to experience, you get various talks from all sorts of people from trans academia. So I've been to various talks, including one about theology and how Christianity is affected by the trans narrative. And you've had talks from various activists from multiple different countries. So looking at how activism has to be adapted depending on where you're living and where you're trying to change law. Um, but also things
Wow.
like self-care and understanding how to support yourself as an activist or just as a trans person existing. And so you get to see
Which is
a wide
incredibly
range.
important.
Yeah, so that there's just a lot more. It's very tailored towards trans people, but it has to go to the conference. There are tiered ticketing systems, and so as a trans person, you can say, "I would like to go to this" and get a free ticket. So, or you
Right.
can go as an academic and you can pay some money. So it's accessible to everyone that wants to engage with the academia rather than just the top level professors or researchers that have the research funds or have the university backing to be able to go and discuss with other academics.
Which is the way forward, because I mean, there's no one gains from just having the richest and most powerful in those spaces, do they? So
Oh
that
yeah,
is, wow, that is incredibly well organized.
yeah. I mean, they've obviously it grows every year, and they use the numbers go up and up and up, and I think over about the first 3 or 4 years, their numbers doubled each year. So we're now having to
Jeez.
find bigger venues to be able to go to because they run a film night, which they have all of the seats booked out, and they run a club night where all of the space is used, and they run the Pride session in one of the parks in Brighton, and there's too many of us. There's not enough space anymore, which in itself is
Oh,
wonderful.
that's fantastic, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, we get to walk down the main boulevard in Brighton with so much trans activism and so much colour and so much excitement, but also as a protest. It's not your standard Pride event. We
Mm.
stop the traffic and we cause a disruption, but it's part of recognising not only the current need for trans activism, but the historical importance of trans activism within the LGBT community.
And it is incredibly important, which I think some people conveniently forget, don't they? So,
Yeah, it's one of those things where various people within the queer community conveniently forget that trans people were the people that started various revolts, who started the Stonewall riots,
mm-hmm,
who were in
mm-hmm,
charge of a lot of things, or who've provided things like pastoral support for many young queer people that in
mm.
times of even worse oppression were the people that were thrown out of homes, were being taken in by older trans people who recognised their experiences and were able to support them.
And that's definitely, I suppose, as this is a History Month podcast, it's definitely worth noting the historical importance of the trans community within the LGBTQ plus
Yeah,
community, because I mean, without the trans community, I don't know where we'd be at, but I don't know if we'd be as far as we are. So that is,
no, I would hope
You've
that
made
there
me
would
want to
be a
go to
step
Transcribe.
up. Oh, it's a brilliant event, and honestly, as well as you get to wear what you want, and there's no pressure to act in a certain way, but it's a very much a family friendly environment. There's in the park, there's a specific area that you're allowed to drink in, but it's predominantly non-alcohol, and so you get
Which
to
is, yeah.
you yeah, it removes that requirement almost that's seen at most other Pride. It's one of the things that I dislike the most
Mm,
about Pride is that everyone else around me, you look in the crowd and everyone's drinking, or you go into the party part of it and everyone is drinking. And as someone that doesn't drink, it's an exclusionary place to be. Whereas if you go to
absolutely.
Trans Pride and there's not the requirement or even the expectation.
The LGBT community does suffer in that sense, in that we don't have many safe spaces that are non-alcoholic, and
No,
that's quite problematic.
yeah, and it's something that I think should be focused on, especially with various increases in likelihood of alcohol abuse or substance abuse within the LGBT community. And so, by
Mm,
not having those spaces that are non-alcoholic, you lose access to the community if you're someone that is dealing with that or has dealt with that in the past.
mm. And you shouldn't be shut off from your community just because you
No,
don't want to drink. That's that is a problem that I really think needs addressing, actually. And it's one that people don't always quite realise, I don't think, either, unless they don't drink or they know someone who doesn't drink.
yeah, I think, yeah, it's one of those things where, as with most things, if it's not something that directly affects you, you simply don't think about it, and so you're just not aware of
Hmm.
the issue that surrounds it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So if you could change anything in the world right now, and it cannot be COVID related, what would it be?
I want people to stop hating on trans kids.
Yes, okay, you win. Ding ding. I've had a lot of good answers, and maybe I love them all dearly, but yes. Carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of which, as an adult or an older teenager, having experienced levels of transphobia, it's a difficulty, and it's something that is of course traumatic, but you have the ability and the understanding to recognize why someone might say that, or you're able to
Mm.
actively deal with that difficulty. But for kids, they're living their lives, and plenty of trans kids come out very, very early, and so they simply have never lived a life where they've not been trans. And by throwing hate towards these kids, all you're doing is making their life worse. It's not ever going to stop trans kids or trans people from existing. You're just creating more pain and more suffering and more trauma for kids that are just trying to live their lives.
By all means, we should not be transphobic to anybody or homophobic to anybody, but for goodness sakes, leave the kids alone.
Yeah,
Why? Like, there's a reason why people get particularly upset in wars and stuff when children are the one who are affected, because children they just leave them the heck alone. Like, they are
yeah,
a no-go space. You can't take your hatred to them.
yeah. The kids should be allowed to do what they want and live as they like, and they shouldn't face any threat of harm for that, for just living as their authentic selves.
Mm. I don't think I have anything to add to that. I just think that, yes, and be kind
Yes,
to trans kids, please. Take
be
this
kind.
away.
Yes.
Um, yes, please. So what is the biggest stereotype of being a trans person that you live up to?
So when I first got your questions through, I couldn't think of any, and then I spoke to my friends, and I fit quite
And they
a
were
few
like,
in
hold on.
here. Yeah, I, the most obvious too is that as a trans man, I have really colourful hair. Um,
Oh,
Very
and you've got
common.
videos so people will be able
I
to see
have
your
video.
lovely hair.
I have the funky, colourful hair, and I'm so surrounded by people within the trans community that it's just normalised. Everyone has colourful hair. Why would you not? But clearly that isn't the case. So I fit into that quite nicely. And then I've also managed to pick one of the 5 top names that any trans people go with. I've got a very common
Oh,
name
is
in the
it really
trans
that
community.
popular?
Yeah, you get so
I didn't
your
know
most
that.
yeah, the really big ones are Daniel, Alexander. You see a lot of Thomas, and then the
Okay.
various forms of Jaden, Aiden, Caden, that sort of thing. But you do see
Interesting.
variation, but it's a really, really common name within the trans community.
So, you know how, or maybe you don't know, I know that every year they're the top 10 names in the UK for babies this year. Is there a top 10 names for people who have transitioned in the UK this year? Which ones they picked?
Oh, who knows? I'm sure. I don't know that it officially exists, but I'm sure if they did create it, they would have the same names most years. There's
I
yeah, there's a
genuinely had no idea.
yeah. I think
I didn't know that was
that
a thing.
there's a big gap between how people choose their names, and obviously it's a thing that comes to them in various ways. But a lot of people I know, I wanted to have a name that was a common name that was specifically masculine and couldn't be misheard as a feminine name.
Hmm.
There was no chance of that coming across as something that would be read as female. And I think quite a lot of
Mm,
people, particularly early on in transition, see that as quite important because your name is one of the few things that you can say, this is who I am, and people don't get a choice on how their perception of that. It's simply that is your name.
absolutely. You can almost buy into people's stereotypes with names, can't you? If you pick a particularly masculine name, people's stereotypes will do the work for them, and they
Yeah,
know that is
absolutely.
a masculine name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's one
Oh,
of the
that's
few
interesting.
advantages of stereotypes, but yeah, it makes a big difference, particularly early on.
Yeah, that is yeah. I'm shook. I suppose it makes sense, doesn't it? I just didn't know that there was a popular name pool. That's so fascinating to me for some reason.
Yeah, I think a lot of it.
So
Yeah, you see a lot of people with similar names, but you also see a lot of people that the common names, as much as they're common within the trans community, are also just very common names anyway. So
they just
they have celebrities or they
yeah.
have people that they have idolized that have these common names. So it's not a surprise that more people will
Mm.
pick them.
Yeah, and I suppose if your whole um experience, growing up or whatever point you choose a new name for yourself has been more unique than most, maybe you just want a very bog standard name. That
Yeah,
in itself is simple, no nonsense. This is my name,
yeah,
done job.
yeah. Nice and easy, which a lot of
So
people
yeah,
use.
nice and easy. Yeah. What is the best part about being trans, would you say?
I'd probably say the community. You get to be friends with a group of people that you probably would never meet if you didn't have a shared common experience of being trans. I know that even if they're just online friends, I have plenty of people that I know online because we're all in a trans group together. Or in person, I've got friends from trans support groups who are 20, 30 years older than I am that I simply wouldn't have met if we didn't have that shared experience. But as a result, I've got some really great friends with very different life experiences from me that mean that I can learn from them and we can enjoy a friendship that we wouldn't have been able to achieve if we didn't have transness as a shared thing.
That's lovely. And I'm so glad that community is out there and it exists, because I don't know if there is somebody listening who thinks, well, maybe this is something that rings true for me, or something that I would like to explore. But are the communities out there? and they're
Yeah,
lovely.
yeah, and
And,
they're
you know, as you've
they're ever
described,
growing.
yeah. And I think it's always nice to know that safe space exists. It very much exists, despite the fact that the hatred is out there and certain laws that have been introduced in this country recently are not helping, but the community is there and they exist. And, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, and there's always
that's really
someone that
nice.
can rally behind you if you need support, and more often than not, someone else will have
Absolutely.
experienced a very similar thing, and so you can get direct
Mm.
advice from people that have experienced it and know what they're talking about.
Which is just ridiculously helpful. I mean, that is a game
Yeah,
changer, isn't it? If you're facing something and you feel alone and you've no idea how to handle it, having someone walk in and be like, "Don't worry, I've done this before.
yeah,
We're an old dog at
absolutely.
this now."
Yeah, if
Yeah.
you can have someone, especially various parts of transition, as well as being hard anyway, are scary because they you might change the way that you're perceived by someone, or you might completely change your relationship with someone. And so if you've got someone else that said, I've experienced this and it turned out all right, or this happened and here's how you can fix it so that it doesn't happen to you,
Mm.
it takes a level of pressure off of particularly young trans people or trans people that are only just coming out, and just removes that pressure and removes some of that hardship that they might worry about experiencing.
And that's fantastic because it just means that the next generation of trans people just has it that little bit easier, and they
Yeah,
just have that like cushion that maybe potentially wasn't there for the generation before
yeah,
them, and that's really nice.
yeah. And I think
That's
it's
lovely.
one of the good things about the whole LGBT community anyway, but particularly with the trans community, I don't think I know anyone that would think otherwise, other than that they want, even if they've experienced a hardship, they don't want someone else to have to experience that. So to be able to prevent that for everyone else in the future is just a brilliant thing.
It is a brilliant thing. Goodness me, there's so much going on behind the doors to the trans community. It's a multifaceted place. It sounds
It
beautiful, to be
is.
honest.
Yeah.
Mm. And so, and Dan, you're a final year, so you've been part of the community at Aston for a long time. Actually, I'd say at this point, you're kind of like, for the freshers and stuff, you're kind of like the pinnacle of the LGBT plus community at Aston at the moment. You're like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you have people who, when you first were a fresher, who you think of as being like the community, but your name and your face definitely comes to mind for me now,
Oh, that's very
because you've
kind of
worked so
you.
hard. Dan, well, no, I mean, you've worked incredibly hard. Dan does a lot of behind the scenes work. What we're doing now is great and it's fun and it's educational, but Dan does stuff with policy and behind the scenes that supports students endlessly, and he's been doing it the whole time. And I just feel like you deserve a bit of recognition, to be honest, because
Well,
you've supported people who may not even know that you've been doing it,
yeah, I guess
and you don't
uh,
shout about it.
yeah, but that's the thing. It's one of, as I was saying before, you want to make someone else's experience better than your own. You don't want other people to have to go through a hardship. And so
Mm.
if
And
if my studying and therefore my understanding of how to write a policy or how to write an angry email means that no one else has to experience that again, then I don't see how that would ever be something that I wouldn't want to do. And certainly it doesn't feel like something I would do for any recognition other than that someone else doesn't have to experience it.
But the thing I think is that you didn't have to walk into Aston and go, right, I see these problems, I'm going to fix them. It wasn't, you didn't have to do it, but you did it anyway. And I just think, I didn't have this planned, but like I'm talking about it, I'm thinking, flipping heck, Dan, you've done so much, and I just think you deserve like pat on the back, because honestly, I get CC'd into these emails that Dan is involved in, and I'm there and I'm there to support him, and I'm 100% behind him, but he's just doing it. Like I'm just kind of there like, oh, but look at you go, I'm so proud.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
yeah, but that's a kind of long segue. But yeah, oh sorry, what were you going to say?
it's one of those things that I think it's part of the reason that I've been part of committee for the society for the last few years. It helps that you get a platform as a committee member, but it gives you a driving reason to be on committee and to be an active participant in the community, both at Aston and then further afield, as people recognise you as someone who might be worth contacting within the community.
And you absolutely are. But what is your favourite thing, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at, about being part of the LGBTQ plus community at Aston?
I think, and I'm sure most people will say it, is the people. I know that as a fresher, I was close with my flat, but they weren't my close friends. And then I came to the LGBT Society, and that's where I met a lot of my friends. It's where I met a lot of my much closer friends. Plenty of whom, even the friends that I made in first year at the society, that I'm still talking to every week, even through lockdown. And you get to meet a lot of people that have different understandings of life and have different viewpoints, but all have that shared common link. And so you just get to enjoy yourself with just a wider range of people.
People who just kind of get it.
Yeah, there's less pressure to be either performative or to have to explain everything. You get to just be yourself, and everyone understands why you might be doing something, or simply doesn't judge you for doing that, even if they don't understand it.
And that is a very small thing that makes a really huge difference, isn't it? Just being able to be yourself without having to just worry about being judged.
Yeah, it particularly when you first start university, there's a level of always having to be outgoing and meeting new people, and so that in itself is draining, particularly when you've moved to a new city and you've moved away from your family, to be able to meet a group of people. And yes, you have to be meeting new people, but you get to relax in a way that you simply don't with plenty of the other students.
And they're great. The people are great. I'm a big fan of the people who are part of the community. They're good eggs.
People are lovely.
They are. So just as a round off, really, is there anything else about being trans or even just genderqueer that you feel like you want to just tell the viewer, tell the world?
Tell the world. Not specifically about being trans, I don't think, but
Great.
if you find something that makes you feel happy, do it. I think there's a lot. Being trans, you find comfort in certain things that perhaps other people wouldn't understand. So when I was very early in my transition, before I was able to do anything legally or medically, for a Halloween costume, I had a waistcoat, and I loved it. And if I was feeling down, I could go and put that on and feel comfort or feel happiness that plenty of people wouldn't usually get to experience. And so if you have something like that is small but makes you feel happy, go for it. Don't let other people judge you for that, just because they wouldn't understand it normally.
Absolutely. That's a really nice take-home message. Things that you find comfortable, as long as, they're not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what other people think of it.
Absolutely.
And I bet that was a cracking waistcoat.
It was always too small for me, but I did love it. I've still got it in my cupboard.
Oh, well, you never know. You might need it. It's a smart thing to have kicking around.
I can't. My shoulders have grown too much. It simply doesn't fit me anymore. But I will keep it because I got it in a charity shop. So it's it's a memento,
at least.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on here today. I feel like I've learned something, and as we were discussing earlier, well, no, you've I think there's no easy thing to do is to come on to a situation like this and talk so openly about yourself when it is something that is sensitive and is, I mean, I know you, Dan, obviously, but like, you know what I mean? You should be commended for that. It deserves some recognition. It's not easy to do. So thank you for just being so honest and so interesting and so fantastic.
Yeah, well, thank you for running such a good podcast. We will hopefully
well, I try.
We try, but yeah, to be able to come on and be informative, it spreads information, it spreads understanding, and that's always a good thing. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much again, and I suppose we can sign off, can't we? Well, thank you very much, and goodbye, everybody.